Okay, I know I'm probably going to get some flack for even trying to discuss this topic, but everybody else has been sharing their wildly varying opinions on this movie since it came out, so I guess it's time I speak my piece on it, even if I am a little late. And listen, for anybody who's looking for another video that's just a bashing of this movie and Rian Johnson, you're in the wrong place because I'm going to stay calm and look at everything that's presented completely rationally. Also, I will only be referring to George Lucas's Star Wars movies and The Last Jedi in this video. Nothing else from either the old or new expanded universes or any TV shows will be brought up here. And needless to say, there will be spoilers ahead for both The Last Jedi and the Star Wars series as a whole, so if you somehow don't know what happens yet, you don't want to, I wouldn't proceed with this video if I were you. This is your only spoiler warning. Alright, so with all of that out of the way, let's get into it. Okay, so when The Last Jedi came out, many people praised it for subverting the audience's expectations, doing a bunch of completely different things with Star Wars that had never been done before, and deconstructing the franchise. But here's the thing. As a man who's written books, I can safely say that the only part of that statement that's true is the deconstruction part. I mean, sure, it did also subvert expectations, but not in the way people sometimes frame it. But I'll get back to that point in a little bit. Because what I want to cover here first is the part about how The Last Jedi did and introduced a bunch of new things into Star Wars. Because you see, the problem with The Last Jedi is that it only has a surface level knowledge of Star Wars, and only the original trilogy at that. Basically, it acts like it knows absolutely everything there is to know about Star Wars and goes about trying to subvert and deconstruct everything, but ends up showing just how little it knows about Star Wars in the process. For instance, there's Luke's line, "You think what? I'm gonna walk out with a laser sword and face down the whole First Order?" That's Rian Johnson's way of saying that wars are really won by a lot more than just fighting with lightsabers. Because that worked out so well for Luke both times he tried it, and various other Jedi as well, who always won when they came charging in with lightsabers, and exactly what the audience expects to happen when they do as such. Or another line by Luke when he's stating his belief why the Jedi should end. At the height of their power, they allowed Darth Sidious to rise, create the Empire, and wipe them out. It was a Jedi Master who was responsible for the training and creation of Darth Vader. Now, once again, this line betrays just how little Rian Johnson understands the prequel trilogy, because the Jedi were not at the height of their power. They were at the height of their prominence, yes, but definitely not at the height of their power. Because one of the main themes of the prequels is that the Jedi had lost their way, which is why the Emperor was able to rise to power. Heck, in Attack of the Clones, Yoda and Mace Windu even mention that the Jedi are starting to be cut off from the Force. That doesn't exactly sound like the height of power, does it? And also, I wouldn't say the Jedi exactly just allowed the Emperor to take over either. It was more a matter of them being too late. And finally, while it is true that a Jedi trained Darth Vader, Obi-Wan wasn't the reason Anakin fell to the dark side. It was much more about the Jedi losing their way and a lifetime of manipulation from the Emperor. In other words, to put all the blame on Obi-Wan's shoulders would be a very ignorant assessment of what happened. And maybe you could argue that. Luke didn't have all the facts when he said that. But the thing is, Rian Johnson is placing him in the right when he says that, which therefore means that he also feels that way about it. And he does have, or at the very least should have, all the facts. And that's not even considering that Obi-Wan claims in A New Hope that the Jedi kept peace in the galaxy for, quote, 1,000 generations. And you have to admit, one mistake, even if it is a pretty big one, is no reason to suddenly say the Jedi were always wrong when their way of doing things worked so well and for so long. Again, the prequel trilogy itself shows the Jedi had lost their way, and that was the problem, not the Jedi themselves or their way of life. But to get to my point about The Last Jedi doing new and different things, let's take a look at some of those praised aspects. For instance, Rey's parents being nobodies, which proves you don't have to come from something to be something. That's certainly something that's never been done in Star Wars before, right? Well, no. Far from it, actually. For instance, who was Obi-Wan's parents? Who were Mace Windu's parents? Who were the Emperor's parents? Heck, who were Han Solo's parents? And forget knowing who Yoda's parents were, nothing's even known about his species. Honestly, when you really look at it, almost all the main characters in Star Wars don't come from anywhere, and yet go on to do some of the greatest things and be some of the greatest heroes in the galaxy. Even Anakin himself is the son of a no-name slave woman, and he's the chosen one. If you ask me, that theme has always been prominent in Star Wars, that where you come from doesn't have to determine who you are. But because the most famous part of Star Wars is that Luke comes from a famous father and must confront his family's legacy in order to save himself and everyone else, The Last Jedi and more casual people assume that it's a novelty to have a hero that comes from nowhere. But as I just pointed out, in actuality, the heroes come from nowhere a lot more often than somewhere in Star Wars. And on that topic, there's also the infamous Broom Boy. Now, he's another character that's been praised for the theme mentioned before, and for showing how inspirational the Jedi can really be. Except that's been done before too, with the main character of the whole story, no less, Anakin Skywalker. He's also a no-name slave boy when you first meet him that's heavily inspired by the Jedi, even saying at one point that he plans to go to every star in the sky someday. But it goes deeper than that as well, because Broom Boy is only meant as a metaphor. To steal a line from a YouTuber who framed this better than I ever could, the point of Broom Boy is that he can be anybody. The point of Anakin is that he is somebody. In other words, Rian Johnson uses a slave as a symbol for his statement. George Lucas takes a slave and gives him his own identity, purpose, and will, which ironically ties back to the themes of The Last Jedi better than The Last Jedi does, and once again demonstrates that it didn't actually do anything new with its concepts. Now, I could bring up other examples of this as well, but because I don't want this video to be 3 hours long, I'll just leave it at that. But to go back to something I said before, the movie also went out of its way to subvert expectations, but didn't do it in the way some people claim. Because most of the subversion that happens in this movie is set up like the audience is expecting the movie to play out just like The Empire Strikes Back had. Case in point, you think Luke's going to be Yoda now and one of the most powerful Jedi to have ever lived? Nope, he's disillusioned and believes the Jedi should end. You expect him to train Rey? Nope, he's not interested in any of that. Poe has essentially taken Han Solo's place, so you assume he's going to come up with a trick to fool the First Order? Nope, he's instead humiliated by a superior who believes a life or death crisis is a good time to teach him a lesson and actually had her own plan all along. You think Rey and Kylo Ren will form a mutual hatred of each other and become mortal enemies? Nope. Turns out they form a bond to the point that she believes she can save him. And you expect her to do that? Nope. Turns out he was planning on using her as part of his plan to take over the galaxy. Just a little extra subversion of the Return of the Jedi for you as well. You think Snoke will turn out to be this powerful enemy that will be almost impossible to defeat, akin to the Emperor? Nope, he's cut in half by Kylo Ren and replaced by him. Do you think there was going to be this huge plot twist around Rey's identity? Nope, turns out her parents were nobodies. You expect the movie to end in a big, epic lightsaber duel? Nope, turns out Luke isn't even there. Now I'm sure there's some things I'm missing, but I think you get the point. Basically, what I'm getting at here is the movie believes it must be The Empire Strikes Back all over again, and the subverting of expectations is its way of having to not be that, but ironically pigeonholes itself in the process. Because here's the thing. Nobody ever said the movie had to be The Empire Strikes Back 2.0. Nobody ever expected it to be The Empire Strikes Back all over again. It could have actually done something completely new and different if it wanted to. I mean, George Lucas certainly didn't believe he had to copy Empire with Attack of the Clones. Seriously, other than a Skywalker losing a limb, what do those two movies actually have in common? Nothing. So if the creator of Star Wars himself felt no pressure to repeat his second installment, why should anybody else? Least of all the audience, and especially an outside creator like Rian Johnson. To put it simply, Rian Johnson felt he was obligated to make another episode 5 and didn't want to do that, so he decided to subvert all the beats of Empire and Star Wars as a whole, which once again ends up revealing that he didn't know much about the Star Wars prequels, which already showed that he actually could have done something different with Star Wars and that nobody really expected him to do. The Empire Strikes Back, only better. In other words, he wanted to do something different when he believed he couldn't, ironically causing him to repeat themes from previous movies because he simply didn't realize he could have actually done something truly different and nobody would have blamed him for it, provided he stayed true to the spirit of Star Wars. And speaking of which, that is where I believe this movie really doesn't understand Star Wars. Because as I mentioned earlier, the only thing this movie really succeeded in doing was deconstructing Star Wars. However, I didn't say it necessarily did a good job at that. Because what can be tricky about a deconstruction is that you have to show what's wrong with something on a fundamental level if you want to demonstrate its flaws. And because The Last Jedi doesn't understand Star Wars, it isn't able to do that. As a result, the deconstruction comes across as extremely mean-spirited, seeming to deconstruct and tear down everything in Star Wars simply because Rian Johnson doesn't like Star Wars. And listen, I'm not trying to imply that was the case at all. Rian Johnson could be the biggest Star Wars fan ever for all I know. All I'm saying is that he went about trying to deconstruct something he didn't understand, and the result was that the fans were left feeling like he was attacking something they loved rather than saying something with a deconstruction worth saying. And to further demonstrate my point, let me bring up a few examples here. Okay, just three things people took issue with in The Last Jedi was its very weird, modern, and at times downright slapstick humor, its extremely obvious political messages, and most notably, turning Luke into a failure who gives up on everything. Now, while most will concede that the humor is out of place for a Star Wars movie, many have come to the defense of the other 2 points, saying that Star Wars has always been political and had political messages, and others even saying that what he did to Luke was the only logical course based off where his story ends in Return of the Jedi. Now, as for the political argument, yes, Star Wars has had its share of messages. But the thing is, they were always timeless ones. Anybody from anywhere in the world or at any point in history could take the same messages away from those movies. And moreover, they were done with much more nuance. You could even ignore them outright if you wanted to. But the politics in The Last Jedi is way too in your face for that. And more importantly, too modern to fit in with Star Wars. Rian Johnson is using the movie as a commentary on modern politics. And while some might argue that he's saying something worth saying, it's not something that belongs in Star Wars. And as for the Luke argument, I can tell you right now that he was destined for something very different than what The Last Jedi presents. And I can prove it to you too. Because here's the thing. George Lucas based Star Wars off of science fiction and fantasy serials and movies he used to watch in his youth. And the thing is, I've actually seen a few of these movies and can very clearly see how they inspired the story of the Star Wars saga, especially a 1940 movie called The Thief of Baghdad. Believe me, I never quite understood what George Lucas was trying to do with Anakin and Padme's romance until I saw that movie. But the point is, Star Wars reflects the stories told in these old serials. Star Wars' subdued brand of humor is lifted directly from them, has the same kind of basic black and white morality. The messages in them are very timeless and universal ones, almost never reflecting the values of their time period, and most importantly, what would happen to the hero. Because if Luke is the main character at this point in the story, then his fate should reflect the ones in those old movies and serials. And for the ones that do show what happens to the hero afterwards, he always goes on to do many great things and become one of the biggest legends of all. And sure, maybe sometimes they fall into a rough patch or briefly give up, but it never lasts for too long. In the end, they always come out on top and live a life of prosperity and success as a reward for their great deeds. And I guarantee you that if George Lucas had continued the story himself, Luke would have had a very similar story to that. Sure, maybe he wouldn't have been in a good place at some point, but he most certainly would have never died a failure and given up on everything for years on end. Now, my point here is if Rian Johnson had wanted to do a true deconstruction of Star Wars, he should have been doing a deconstruction of those old movies and serials, because those are what make up the foundation of Star Wars. But instead, he more deconstructs Star Wars as a cultural phenomenon, how the audience perceives it, and what he believes they think is going to happen. And as I mentioned earlier, this led the deconstruction to be viewed as, whether it was intentional or not, a mean spirited one that was an attack on the people that loved Star Wars. And as I also mentioned earlier, this also shows just how little Rian Johnson actually understood Star Wars and demonstrates what the whole problem was in a nutshell. He set out to do a deconstruction of something he didn't know enough about, which caused him to both repeat themes from previous movies in an attempt to do something different and come across as trying to deliberately attack and destroy Star Wars. Now again, how much you loved or hated the movie is up to you, but as a writer, I honestly feel it's extremely obvious he knew a lot less about Star Wars than he was letting on while writing this movie. Okay, I think I'm going to leave it off there. I do have a lot more I want to cover, but the video's already gone on for too long, so I'll save it for a future video if you guys are that interested in this topic. But for now, I'd like to hear your thoughts. Do you believe The Last Jedi doesn't understand Star Wars and is therefore a bad deconstruction of it? Or do you believe it's perfect and I'm the one who doesn't know what I'm talking about? Please feel free to tell me in the comments below. But please let's try and keep it civil. I really don't want my comment section turning into a war zone. Because if you disagree with me, that's fine. I don't have any issues with you if you do, and all I ask is that you give the same courtesy to others. And thank you all for watching. It's all greatly appreciated, and I hope to see you all next time.